Que prendan su video. Hola Beatriz, mucho gusto y gracias por unirse, encantado. Les pido que prendan su video para poder empezar. Sonia, Nicolás, we're starting.
I thought it would replace, but it didn't.
So let's remove. Sí, pues, siéntense. Tú te puedes sentar al lado de Nicolás si quieres.
Yo creo que tú vas a hablar primero, ¿no?
Okay.
Porque nada más. Yeah, that's fine. I'll just pin her again. Redo it again.
Estás muteada, Beatriz. Vas a ser la primera a la que le voy a preguntar ahora que empecemos. Asegúrate de, exactamente, de cliquear.
Sí, si ya me escuchas, eres Diego, ¿no?
You're here.
Thank you. Gracias. I'm going to grab one of these if that's okay. Actually, you know what? I would prefer this pocket.
I will. Mark, ¿puedes prender tu cámara, por favor?
Told me to say hi to you, so gotta do my marital duties.
Victoria, cuando puedas, si le puedes traer un cafecito a Eric, me lo pones aquí y yo se lo doy. ¿Y cuándo empezamos? Maybe I would say let's start and then let's do the coffee. Because it's 11 people are. So, good morning and welcome to another edition of the American Desk. I am Diego Area, CEO of Global Americans. We're coming to you live from FIU's Washington, D.C. Thank you to Florida International University for hosting us today. And we're here to talk about Peru. Peru went to the polls on Sunday and the count is still underway. What we know so far. No candidate has crossed 50%, which means we're almost certainly heading to a runoff. Keiko Fujimori is leading the first round, but behind her, there is a tight three-way race for second place between Rafael López Aliaga, representing right-wing anti-political establishment, Jorge Nieto, a centrist promoting institutional reform, and Roberto Sánchez, post-Castillo left a little behind, but still relevant in the broader field. We will be covering the evolution of this process heading into the June 7 elections in Global Americans through our group of fellows and senior advisors. You will meet some of them today. But beyond this, there were also significant logistical failures in this election. Polling stations in Lima did not receive the materials. Voting was extended until Monday yesterday for over 50,000 voters. And the head of the electoral body, the unpack, is now under investigation. All of these adds a layer of institutional fragility to an already complex political country. Today, we have an exceptional panel to make sense of what happened, to help the stakeholders understand what are the implications of the results, and what it means to Peru, to the United States, and to the region. Today's panelists are Beatriz Merino, former Prime Minister of Peru, constitutional lawyer and governance expert, joining us virtually from Lima. Mark Wachenheim, Senior Director at Global Americans and founder of W International, also joining virtually from Lima. Sonia Verdu, Senior Advisor at Global Americans and International Development Specialist. Nicolás Saldías, Senior Analyst for Latin America at the Economist Intelligence Unit. And last but not least, Mr. Eric Farnsworth, partner at Continental Strategy and senior associate at CSIS. I would like to start from Lima, getting the sense of people on the ground, experts on the ground who have been engaging in this process. Beatriz, I want to start with you. Thank you again for joining us today. And something that has happened to me in the last days is I ask all my Peruvian friends, who will be the president, etc. And the answer is the same. You're asking the wrong question. No? It is very important who will be the president, but maybe most important will be what is the confirmation of the bicameral body of Congress. So, Beatriz, can you tell us what are your thoughts on the implications of these results and what it means for the future of Peru's stability, democratic stability?
Thank you. Thank you, Diego, and hello to everybody. Well, this is perhaps the answer would be both, both the government and the Congress. But let me start by saying that this is a key election after 5 years, where, as you all know, we have had a lot of political instability, a lot of presidents being vacated, coming and going, most of them, or a lot of them, coming from Congress. And since this started, I guess, with Mr. Kuczynski and the vacancy with Mr. Kuczynski, and then also with Mr. Castillo and the coup that happened on December 7th. And so I guess the what the country today is looking for is what the next 5 years are going to look at, and how do we get the stability that the country needs with a president that will stay for the 5 years that it has been elected, and then we go to the process. But I just want to focus this in the sense that most Peruvians, I think, today are very, very concerned and very focused on the fact that we do need political stability just as much as we do have economic stability. As you all know, we have a president of the Federal Reserve Bank here, central bank we call it, in Peru that has had, I don't know, 10 presidents maybe, and it stayed there, and that we all look up to. And that has provided the macroeconomic stability that the country enjoys today. But perhaps the first thing about the election would be to say that what happened on Sunday is a sense that most of the country has looked as the center right, maybe center left, but the center as the way out of this political instability that we have lived through all these years. This is now. What happened with the process on Sunday, particularly in Lima, I think has brought into us more embarrassment and anger than true damage to the legitimacy of the process in itself. Anger because we have had a gentleman leading one of the electoral bodies that, when they were created, enjoyed a very strong trust of citizens of Peru, but unfortunately, in the last election, was accused of not running things properly. And what happened that happened in the south of Peru, but today in these elections and what happened on Sunday happened in Lima, where a lot of the polling sites, the polling booths, they were the polling stations, I mean, they were not open. He says, well, only 55,000 people were not able to vote, and then they voted on Monday, but that's not all. That's the whole truth. The whole truth is that a lot of the polling stations were one of the candidates, particularly the right-wing candidate, Mr. Lopez Aliaga, had a lot of strong vote. It's hardcore vote. So now we're in the middle of this, and something happened yesterday. It has never happened in this country and probably in any country, and it is the head of the national and the first body that regulates the whole election, which is President Burneo, the president of Jurado Nacional de Elecciones, the jury that filed a criminal indictment against Mr. Corbeto, a criminal indictment against Mr. Corbeto for his actions on Sunday. What it was, now we are all focused on what the results are, because the OMP is counting and counting the votes. We can discuss this later, but I do not think that this is going to end today. I think Mr. Perveto is right now in the middle of a very, very hard problem. He's going to have to face the prosecutors and the judges for what happened on Sunday. And according to what the results are, basically, we all, as you said, Diego, we all know that Ms. Fujimori, Keiko Fujimori, is going into the runoff. And who is going to be the second to go with Ms. Keiko Fujimori is what is in debate today. It seems like there are two candidates that are leading into that position, which are Rafael López Aliaga and Mr. Nieto, both, right and center left, maybe. And now the left wing, radical left, Mr. Sanchez from Juntos por el Perú, is escalating little by little. And what the assumption is that what happened in Lima was precisely because they're so close that precisely to get those votes away from Mr. López Aliaga. And Dr. Burneo, who, by the way, is a Supreme Court judge, he is a very young, very smart, and very ethical and righteous person, and that I respect a lot, has moved into putting against him a criminal investigation now in the hands of the prosecutors. Is a very, very, because you see, here in Peru, we have this situation. We put everybody that commits a crime in jail. And that means even presidents. I don't know, I think we have had 5 presidents in jail. Right now, I think we have 4, in jail right now. It's a very strange country, but we do put people in jail when they commit crimes. And people might think it's instability. I personally, because I'm a lawyer, happen to think that's the right thing to do. When people commit crimes, they should go to jail. The judges have a fair trial, and the prosecutors do a fair job in the sense that they are asked for.
Beatriz, definitely a lot to unfold on what are the implications of these issues around the logistical operations of the election. I want to hear more about, again, what are your thoughts on the how is going to be the Congress and how is that distributed given the polls that we have seen. But maybe before that, I want to turn it over to Mark. Mark, what are your reactions, your thoughts on what happened in the country in the last 2 days, and what are the challenges that the next government will face?
Sure, Diego. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Yeah, well, that's a two-part question. Let me take the first part first. I think that what's the most striking about this moment is I think that for the first time in a long time, if not ever, and despite the political turbulence that Beatriz correctly points out, we can be relatively certain, based on the likely composition of the 2 candidates that will progress on to the second round, that the country is going to enter its next presidential term with a high degree of economic and foreign policy continuity. So regardless of the outcome of the second round, and that makes the country a predictable partner for investors, for countries, for the United States, for people who want to undertake projects in Peru. But at the same time, I think something that was also very striking and that this election has revealed, that's something broad-based and deep, is a popular demand for order. That's what the campaign has been centered about, on the political campaigns of the candidates that are in the lead, much less about ideology and really about order. That's, I'd say, the main political signal that's coming out of the campaigns. And you see this daily as the concern of citizens for their own safety, for citizen security, but really it extends far beyond that. Now, to answer the second part of your question about challenges for the next government, um, I'd highlight three. First, on a political level, I think as Beatriz was mentioning, no candidate that will win the second round will enjoy a majority in Congress. So that means that for simple majority decisions, they'll have to have a coalition, a governing coalition of one other party and a few additional members of Congress, or two parties or more. And in the case of qualified or supermajorities, the most important decisions, they'll need a coalition of multiple parties. So the speed and coherence with which a majority is constructed is going to determine the government's ability to act. Second, I'd say on a policy level, the challenge is to begin delivering on that demand, that popular demand, well, all of the citizens' demands, but in particular, for showing early visible results in response to the demand for order, starting with citizen security, but extending across government institutions. And finally, on a strategic level, I'd say that Peru is going to need to navigate very carefully its relationships with both the United States and China in a context in which the US, as we know, is increasingly focused on the hemisphere. And I'm not saying that that requires a choice in a traditional sense, but it's going to require closer alignment between Peru's economic decisions and its strategic considerations. And managing that balance is going to be a central task for the next government.
Gracias, Mark. Now, here in DC, Andres, I want to attack you with my first question in DC. Mark talked about continuity, right? And despite the fact that we don't know who are the two final candidates for the runoff, what are your thoughts on the U.S.-Peru relations, the relations with the Trump administration, regardless of the scenario?
Well, I think continuity is going to be really important, and it's notable that the engagement of Peru around some of the big summits that we've seen from the Trump administration focus on the Western Hemisphere has been absent because of political shifts, some of the instability and impeachments that we know have been long an issue and continue to be in Peru, and not necessarily because of misalignment politically, which I think is an important thing to know. Hopefully, once these elections are resolved, we'll see a level of stability that allows for that kind of engagement more continually, which I think is a necessary condition really for maximizing the opportunities of U.S. and Peru engagement at this opportunity where this administration, I think, continues, despite obviously challenges in the Middle East and elsewhere, continues to put a high priority on the Western Hemisphere, and I think that will particularly looking into the second half of this year into the next will open up opportunities and present some challenges, certainly not necessarily unique for Peru, but generally for the region. And I think in that context, it's really important to have not only aligned leadership, but also a leadership which the U.S. And counterparts elsewhere in the region know will be counterparts for a lasting duration, which I do think, while we've had this, obviously the Peruvian economy is very resilient to these political waves and shifts. I think the relationship with the United States is less so immune to that. And particularly if we're talking about deepening some of those opportunities for engagement, I do think that it's going to be important to see that stability. And that's going to involve a range of issues, much of that obviously within Peru. But I do hope that it presents the opportunity of the United States kind of outsized or renewed and heightened engagement kind of coalesces the thinking within Peru of what can we do to focus on seizing that, particularly over the next couple of years.
You raise a good point, Andres. Definitely challenges, and the volatility, the political volatility, internal political volatility, it makes it harder for the U.S. to engage in a meaningful way. However, if I were advising the U.S. government right now, I would say, hey, you should be looking and engaging more at this stage, so you can engage with the candidates beforehand. We talked about the kind of the political alignment before, and depending on the outcome, I think that early engagement, although you mentioned the world is kind of in flames, right? Iran, Venezuela are another priorities, but part of the reason why we're doing this event is raising the importance for stakeholders that listen to Eric, to you, to Sonia in Peru and in the U.S., the importance and the opportunity that just making a few kind of engaging in a meaningful way early on can pay dividends. Overall, because like the big elephant in the room in Peru, and we will talk about it later, is China's presence in Peru, and that's of strategic importance for the U.S. But before going to that and getting into the economics of it, I want to hear from Nicolas and Eric about it. Sonia, maybe kind of a bridge between the two conversations. How can we understand Peru's electoral moment? What are we seeing in terms of governance, institutions, corruption?
Yes, so I really agree with Mark and with Andres that Peru and this election should not be seen as a turning point of any kind, but a continuation of what's happening. So really there is institutional fragility inside Peru that has been the consequence of many, many years of corruption practices and stagnation of the system. At that point, if we see this political instability and we see the fragility, then we have to wonder if it really matters which party is in charge after these elections, or whoever is in charge, whoever wins, needs to do an internal reform of all these systems. And that's basically what is happening right now and what it needs in Peru right now, I think. So aside of that, obviously all the things that have happened, what you mentioned about the unpack situation and about the rep that has been, arrested by the anti-corruption police, all these things, and have been fueled also by past allegations of corruption. So what happened in Peru is we had like 20 years or more of corruption practices that have not been tackled. So at this point, we have many examples. If we get the Odebrecht example, we have like 20 years of presidents in Peru that have been linked to illicit financing practices with Odebrecht, right? So, and nothing has been really, resolved on that matter. So in that sense, we even have Keiko, who was, in a pre-trial arrest for 60 months, and she was obviously clearly clear by the Constitutional Court, but it was clear on a procedural matter, not really on the merits of the case. So if you see that, and also other allegations of corruption, especially around the 2021 elections and situation, right? So all these things create a scenario that doesn't really help to continue or in a different path. So I don't think the political branch of this, so the new government or the new legislature, is gonna be able to make any changes without addressing the institutional fragility and the corruption. And for that, we have these maybe good news. We have a new chamber, so the Senate, the first since 1992, so that's good. We think that maybe that will balance the political situation. And at the same time, that confrontation between the executive and the legislative that we've seen for many, many years, and that, kind of the passive, I don't want to say it because I'm a lawyer, but that passive role that the judiciary, is taking, and that probably calls for a deep, independent justice reform in Peru, right? So all these facts are only to say that what we need to do is we need to look beyond the elections. So who is going to win doesn't really matter who, but whoever wins, let's start tackling all these before we can even talk about the stability, because macroeconomics are saying that Peru is doing good. It's not the problem with the economy, it's the problem with the institutional fragility, the institutions inside Peru that needs that reform. So we need to look a little bit inwards instead of outwards in this, I think, right after the elections.
Thank you, Sonia. Eric, we're seeing this cyclical wave in Latin America. Bukele, Cast, in Argentina as well. Do you see this as an anti-incumbent kind of phenomena, or are voters just leaning to the right? And what are the implications of this wave for the next decade of U.S.-Latin America relations?
Well, Diego, thank you for the invitation. The first thing I would say is we don't actually know who the president will be, so we can't actually answer that question with clarity this morning, but we can certainly make some educated guesses, I suppose. But before we do that, you do such a great job with Global Americans, so congratulations and for this timely panel. And I'm very pleased to join my colleagues and Beatrice and Mark remotely. It's the A team, so well done, congratulations. And to FIU and Carlos and your team. But I would be remiss if I didn't also give a shout out to somebody from my team, Isabella Ford, who was with FIU and she's now with Continental Strategy. So there is life after FIU, Carlos, and so we are proof of that, and it's a good life too. So, but in any event, real pleasure to be here to talk about one of my favorite countries, which is Peru. It's a complicated moment, and I've always said that people in each country vote based on their own circumstances. They don't vote on what's happening next door in another country. They don't vote based on global trends. They don't vote based on some academic exercise. What they vote for is their own personal circumstances. And what we've seen in Peru is what we've seen in other countries around the region, which is to say a real concern about crime and corruption. It's interesting that the economy has not been part of this conversation in a major way, and that's because the economy continues to do well and it continues to outperform. And for those of you who are old enough to remember, and if you're not old enough to remember, go on YouTube, you can see it, but the old commercial for the Energizer batteries, there was an Energizer bunny who would beat his drum and continue to go, and he would never quit, right? He would never quit. And I kind of think that that's the Peruvian, that's the Energizer bunny equivalent in Latin America, is the Peruvian economy. It just doesn't quit. It keeps going and going and going, right? Look at YouTube. But the point is that, and as was just being said, look, the politics are complicated. But somehow they haven't quite infected the macroeconomy in a way that would cause a concern or a pullback, and I think that's a real benefit of the Peruvian economy. It's not to say that will last forever. It's not to say that people are completely discounting the political impact on the economy. I don't think we should. I don't think that would be wise. But I think the Peruvian economy has proven resilient based on its makeup, based on many important things that are occurring there. And I think that's to the credit of the Peruvian people. There's also a very key element, though, and that's the financial management of various institutions. And we've already talked a lot about institutionality. It's come up, it needs to be reformed, particularly the electoral process. That's going to have to be something that people will look at very closely in coming days and weeks. But the person of the head of the central bank, Julio Velarde, who's in town this week for the World Bank IMF meetings, has done a spectacular job to manage Peru's economy. The Peruvian finance ministers have been, by and large, really, really good. And the question is, do you have people that will be able to maintain that financial and economic management in a way that continues to strengthen Peru's economy, despite what some people might call the dysfunction of the political system? My personal view is the answer to that is yes, because I do know some of the people who are involved in that, and so that gives me some confidence. But the point is that that's something to watch. Now, in terms of the broader implications, U.S. relations, all of that, again, until you know the president, the makeup of the government, what is the actual mandate that the president was elected on, we don't know that yet because we haven't gotten to the second round. We haven't even completed the first round. It's a little bit hard to make educated guesses on that. But I would make one point that I think shows the importance that the U.S. gives to Peru. And people say, well, it's forgotten. It's one of those countries that Washington doesn't pay much attention to. First of all, I would say that's not accurate, based on what's been happening strategically with China and these types of issues. But look at who the U.S. sent as ambassador to Lima. Very important, very connected, very much part of the U.S. president's team in the context of the Western Hemisphere strategy. And I think that's as important a signal as you're going to get in terms of the importance of Peru to the United States and to the Trump administration. And I would say that that's something to take a hard look at because it shows Washington's, not just commitment, but Washington's engagement with whoever the next president will be. And again, I take that as a positive sign. So look, do we know how it's going to be tomorrow or a week from now or next month or after June 7th? No, we don't know those answers, but we do have some things that we can point to that are at least trending favorably despite the very complicated headlines. And I do agree, we need to have a hard look at the electoral system and the institutions. I think that's very clear. But I think the Peruvian authorities will probably do that in the next round.
Thank you very much, Eric. Nicolás, help us understand how is this possible? The Energizer Bunny phenomenon. How is that possible in a country like Peru?
I'm going to start using that in reports. I don't cover Peru anymore, but I wish I did because I could just use that in there. Excellent points by Eric. He's right. I mean, the Peruvian economy does just keep on going. 3% growth, almost regardless of what's happening politically or domestically. But I think there's two frames of looking at that. There's a half full and half empty. And the half full is, well, the Energizer Bunny keeps on going. But the half empty is that why isn't it growing faster? It should be growing 2 times as fast, right? And so when you think about it from that perspective of the opportunity cost that's implied by political instability, Peru's worse off still, right, than it could otherwise be. So I always think it's important to think of it counterfactual, right? So like that's the first thing I would say. In terms of Peru's macroeconomic stability, I think what's important is, you have this like epiphenomenon of like lots of political chaos, what we're seeing and stuff like that. But there are anchors in Peru's institutions and economy that are very important. The first anchor is the experience of the 80s and the consequences that left Peru. And what that experience had left is a lived memory of economic mismanagement that people do not want to return to, right? And that translated to the Constitution that Peru created in the early 90s. If you remember when Castillo was elected president, his whole campaign was around changing Peru's Constitution. And there was enough resistance that didn't go anywhere. And why? Well, one of the reasons why is because people internalized the importance of having that constitution to engender investment, right? Because of the strong investor protections that the Constitution has. So the difficulty of actually reforming Peru's constitution is an important variable to understand why Peru's economy is stable as it is, and is as attractive as it is to investors. I think the second pillar is what we were discussing earlier with Velarde and the central bank. Velarde wanted to retire in 21, and Castillo basically begged him to stay, effectively, because he understood the consequences of not having that anchor, right? So Peru's central bank is critical to demonstrate monetary competency, and inflation is consistently at target, right? Now, there's some noise here or there, but more or less everyone, if you look at expectations, They're anchored. And why is that? Because people believe the central bank will do what's necessary. The third anchor, I would say, in Peru's economy that's important is its enormous foreign reserves. I don't, like, it is around $90 billion. To put that into context, what the best measure of that, right, is it's 18 months of imports. So Peru can, imagine there's no exports. It can import still for a year and 6 months, right? Which is, I think, the highest in Latin America, right? So it's basically blindado, right? So I would say in terms of Peru's pillars, those are the three. Can those be eroded? Yes, they can be eroded. And I do think what is important to pay attention to now in this election is who is going to be facing Keiko Fujimori. Because we don't know if, for example, Roberto Sanchez is going to come second. If that were to happen, we would have a redux of 2021. And Roberto Sanchez might be more competent than Castillo. And that would lead to, I think, a lot more market uncertainty than we have seen recently. So it's important to see how the election shapes out in the next couple of days.
Thank you, Nicolas. Beatriz, going back to Lima, I interrupted you before, so I want to give you more space to talk to us about how could these irregularities in the process affect the runoff? What are the implications internally? Tell us, what are your thoughts, please?
Well, after listening, thank you very much to Sonia and Eric and Andres and Nicolas. There are a few things I would have to say, I would like to say. First of all, democracy is strong in Peru. Democracy is strong. There is nothing Peruvians like more than to defend the right to vote. Even during the Shining Path years, up in Ayacucho, up in the Andes, where Shining Path was threatening our Andean people to kill them if they went to vote, they did go and voted. And that's exactly what happened in this country. And all this noise we're hearing, and all this is because of the anger of the people that wanted to vote and express themselves by election in democracy. It's the people's power that happened. Second thing is, as very well Nicolas has said, the economy is strong and it will continue to be strong. Now, who of all the candidates has been the only one that has said, I'll fire Mr. Velarde? Sanchez. And by the way, who is Sanchez taking to the Senate? Antauro Mala, who has added, and I am going to put him in jail because he's a traitor. So, does it have a bearing? Can it happen? I don't think so. I think Congress is going to have a majority of right and center right or center left. And the radical left, even if they take over White House or however you want to name it, they will not have the power. They will not have the majority to either change the Constitution or even take over the reserves that Mr. Sanchez has already said he wants to take. So I think there's a lot said in the campaign, and there's the reality check, okay? And there is, of course, strengths in Peru. What are the strengths? Not all the institutions are weak. All the institutions that have to do with the economy actually are strong, and some of them even have an international reputation, like the Federal Reserve Bank, like our local IRS or our local customs, or even the banking system that is very transparent, very clear, very competitive internationally, and the business is there. We're growing, and it is true that we could be growing more, particularly if we avoided all some of the ideological things that stop, particularly in mining, some of the projects. But still, some of the big, Peru still ranks very high in copper and also in agro exports. Many of them to the United States, by the way. So, what are our weaknesses? Where is it that we have to work? Security, health, education. So we do have weak institutions, the police, the judiciary, the DOJ. We have to work very hard on those and to provide the kind of stability. Now, the Senate, I think, by the way, I was a member of the last Senate that existed. And what they have designed, I think, is good. They have designed a strong Senate that is not political, the House will be the political, but still, and it cannot be eliminated by the president like Mr. Vizcarra did, most unfortunately, with the Congress 7 years ago when he replaced this Kuczynski. And so the Senate is going to be stable. It's going to be there for 5 years. And for what I have seen as of today, there's going to be a majority of right, even far right, center right, and center left. So, having been a senator and having known how the attitude and the environment is there, I would assume that there's going to be no appetite for either changing the constitution or changing anything that has to do with economic stability, no matter what they have said. So I do think it's a good thing that and the other thing that I wanted to say is I think that this, even with all the problems, I think we will have a legitimate president. Because at the end of the day, the discussion today is who's going to go with this Keiko Fujimori to the second round. We don't know who's going to win. We still have the whole second round to go. But I still think, like Mark has said, that we are a strong partner. If I were asked, I spent many of my years when I worked in Procter & Gamble, and I know what was important for them. And I don't think the level of corruption in this country has stopped international companies from coming here. I think the most serious and important institutions with which the investors deal with fight very well and have a good reputation as to how they are structured and how they deal with taxes, or they deal with banks, or they deal with money, etc. We do have problems with security. There's a lot of urban insecurity, and people are very frustrated. Actually, that was one of the reasons that we had all these changes, and there's like minor corruption. Now, of course, that's very bad, and we should fight it, and we should. I don't think it's more than many other countries. I do think that if I were to bet for a Latin country, I would bet for Peru, because of the strengths it has, because of the economy it has, and because with all our problems, we're a strong democracy. That's
And we agree. I think, Beatriz, we all agree with your statement here. We're betting on Peru. We care about Peru, and that's why we're having this conversation. Thank you for that. And thinking about Peru, Mark, I would like to ask you, what are the perceptions in Lima, in Peru, about starting like digging deeper into the China conversation, to China's presence, China's influence, and the connection between China's influence and the erosion of the institutions, corruption, etc.?
Thanks for the easy question, Diego. I'd like to react to some of what I've heard from the other panelists, if that's okay. What Beatriz says is exactly right. I call them islands of institutional excellence. I would say, in addition to the central bank, we could include Proinversión, we could include the foreign ministry. But I think the interesting thing is, why is it that these institutions function the way they do, with a different kind of a logic, with a solution-oriented logic? And it has to do with recruiting top talent. It has to do with retaining top talent. It has to do with remuneration, with ongoing training, and I think, therefore, the challenge for the next government, or any government, really is to expand these successful models across the institutions of government, because they have models to look at here within the country. Eric made several important points about Julio Velarde and his team. And that's a question that sometimes people raise as to whether, the approach and the steady hand with which he's guided the central bank will change upon his departure. And I would say that we have an answer to that, which is that he has institutionalized his approach. He's cultivated a cadre of excellent professionals. There's a deep bench at the central bank. And I'd say that when that final history is written of his contribution to Peru's economy, in addition to what he was able to do at the helm, it was this process of institutionalizing his legacy. I think that we will see that. Another point that I'd like to make, reacting to something that Eric raised about the Energizer Bunny, sort of that continues to chug along. I think it's important to keep in mind, and this is something that sets Peru aside, that's very unique to Peru, is that there's an economic chapter in the Constitution. That was from Alberto Fujimori, Keiko Fujimori's father's period in government in the 1990s, which preserves the absolute autonomy of the central bank and also limits the fluctuations within fiscal policy to within a band. So if that's one of the secret recipes for why Peru has not fallen into populism. Because even if they've had populist presidents, they haven't been able to access the resources to pursue big populist policies, and that also explains the reserves that were mentioned. Regarding something that Andres mentioned, regarding the strength of the relationship with the United States, I would say that it is a very strong relationship, and the scaffolding that undergirds that is the free trade agreement. I know Eric and others here know that that chapter of the relationship between the two countries very well, and have been a part of it. But as a result, it's a multifaceted relationship, but it's largely been a relationship that's been dominated by the economic sphere. And I think that what we're seeing now, with the naming of Peru by the United States as a key major non-NATO ally, which is a signal of a desire to deepen security cooperation, and Peru was one of the countries that was signatory to the agreement of the Shield of the Americas in Miami just a few months ago. That demonstrates interest in expanding that relationship from purely economic realm to a two-pillar approach, which the second pillar being security. Now, obviously, we know that what matters more than the formal designation is what sits behind it. We know that, and Andres will say this if I don't, the U.S. has limited bandwidth to engage with our partners in the region and around the world. And how do we prioritize, and how do we identify where we invest time and resources? By the ongoing steady engagement from those partners, and also their willingness to put their own resources behind our joint priorities, in this case, joint security priorities. So I think that we will see in the coming days and months and year, if we see signals to that effect, then I think that we can count on the very solid relationship between the two countries expanding into a security realm as well. And you asked me though about China. I guess what I'd like to say about that, Diego, is, and I thought you would mention the port of Chancay, because it's become a symbol. It's a symbol here in Peru of that engagement that you're talking about, that presence by China, which is in about three key sectors: industry, technology, and manufacturing, and minerals, critical minerals. And Peru is open or exposed in all three. well, that port, which is a national symbol now, it's sort of associated with national prestige and a symbol of attracting investment and participating in global trade routes and opening up greater commerce with Asia. It's also a symbol, I'd say, in Washington. It's a symbol of the fact that the Chinese presence in the region has transitioned from being seen purely as economic to as having a strategic influence. And I would say that in the case of Peru, the logic is, this is an open economy that needs investment for creation of jobs to address and bring people out of poverty, and to fund investment that can't easily be funded through local investment. In Washington, we look at it as control by extra regional actors of key strategic nodes that could be choke points, and that represent a control of countries' critical infrastructure. So we have these two different logics that are operating. And to the extent that these two logics don't intersect, then I think that the same project can be looked at in two very different ways and can create friction in a relationship. So I think that what's needed there is not to select one or the other as a preferred interpretation, but instead to sort of bring these two different logics closer together, so that they're not moving in parallel but are overlapping. I think the challenge on the United States side is to realize that the security dimension, I think, needs to be accompanied by real credible instruments to promote economic integration, investment, and provide alternatives. Something along the lines of an America's Act or something similar to that would provide the other side of the coin to what the administration is rolling out this year on the security front. And I'd say that the challenge for Peru is to develop a greater sophistication in analyzing sources of investment, understanding that not all investment is equal, that investment comes with different motivations, and to move from a focus on openness to a focus on selectivity, and understanding that short-term economic gains can bring long-term problems down the road in terms of decreased national autonomy over key infrastructure. So I think that both sides have some work to be done to come together, in honest and frank conversation, and work together to address the challenges and the concerns of both sides.
Thank you, Mark. Andres, what are your reactions to that? How do you see the U.S.-Peru U.S.-China strategic competition playing out in Peru? We don't know what will happen with the elections in Peru, but we know who's the president of the United States. What's the U.S. policy towards that? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah. Well, I agree with Mark. I think there's definitely a disconnect in how Peru and the United States see China. That's not unique to Peru. There's, I think, in much of Latin America, a disconnect there. Although that has shifted, I would say, in parts of the region. In Peru, not so much. And because of this project in particular, the port in Chancay, I think Peru is very much a poster child for Washington of the concerning nature of China's advances in our hemisphere. I think one of the things that I see with this political instability, one of the consequences that particularly in the diplomatic bilateral realm with the United States, is that the way China and the way the U.S. engage with countries and with Peru, I think, work better under different circumstances. And China obviously has been able to take advantage of this or work around this political instability in Peru in a way that the United States hasn't. I think that's because of the way we operate in part. It's also, obviously things like corruption are a big toolkit for the Chinese in Peru and elsewhere, and that's also a factor. So that's one of the reasons I see this kind of turning the page on political instability and unpredictability as really being important for the relationship with the United States. And I think if we do see that, I think that we'll see a bridging of the gap in understanding about those concerns that Washington has about the Chinese presence, and that's I think it's going to be increasingly, obviously security has been the primary discussion, looking at migration and narco trafficking has really been the center of the discussion this first year of the Trump administration when it comes to the Western Hemisphere. And I think as we continue to make important gains in that realm, the focus will shift towards China. And that's going to be for Peru. I think it's going to generate some uncomfortable conversations. But if we're able to see a kind of an understanding of, I agree with a few people who said it. The idea of telling Peru to choose one over the other, I think, is going to be really complicated and probably won't be the approach of the Trump administration. But there will need to be certain guardrails that Washington will want to see before particularly economic engagement and these other spheres are pursued more rigorously. And again, within this environment where Mark kind of alluded to this, we have limited attention, not only and resources, not only globally with the Middle East, but within the Western Hemisphere, particularly now where we have a growing number of countries that are very proactively aligned with the United States, including on the China issue and on security. That creates I think a dynamic where a competition for the attention of the U.S., the positive attention of the U.S. is going to be more complicated. And that's going to be a factor for Peru. There are a lot of factors that Peru, because of that Chinese presence, but also because of the mining resources and others that I think will make Peru an important focus for U.S. policy in the Western Hemisphere. But still, the China issue is one that I think will have broader repercussions in that engagement.
You know what? Listening to you, Andres, something that maybe there is some value to be created in communicating and articulating those guardrails from the U.S. to Peru. In that direction, maybe that's the typical thing that foundations, think tanks, and organizations, of course, the ambassador will be kind of spearheading that initiative, but creating more layers of communication, because at the end of the day, there is a clear contrast between the perspectives of the Peru side and on the U.S. side, and kind of closing that gap. I think it can create value. Thank you for that. Sonia Verdu, Senior Advisor, Global Americans. Looking ahead, what do you see? We have talked about some of these, but what do you see about some potential risks for Peru once a new government is inaugurated? And again, let's talk about specific reforms, institutional reforms that you see viable in the future.
So, thank you, Diego Areas. Well, I have to say, I think I'm going to be the Mr. Potato Head blocking the Energized Bunny here. So I'm sorry to say, but yeah, I mean, it's a fact that corruption is present all over Latin America. So it's nothing to do with Peru specifically. And all these wonderful things that the economic institutions have done in Peru are great. But there is a couple of things that I would like to address on that specific point. One is that resilience, which Peru is extremely resilient, can be confused with progress and stability and real democratic stability. So we really need to address the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is that the corruption is very intrinsic in the institutions, right? And just to give you a couple of examples of how the perception of corruption is in Peru specifically, we only have to look at some indexes, right? So if you look at the corruption perception index from Transparency International, Peru, it's scoring 30 out of 100, and it's been at that level for many years. So meaning even, I will say even a little lower in the last couple of years. So that tells you that, the perception is that the corruption is there, and it's very heavy. It weighs very heavily on, other aspects of society. But also, if you look at another index, I mean, being again the lawyer, the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index tells you that 93% of members of the legislature, it's considering or has taken bribes to change the vote or to favor some type of position in a vote or in any other act in their professional capacity. So that's a staggering 93%. It's a lot. So even if some of those could be, maybe are not, you have a percentage there that maybe are not, it's just a big thing. And that's a perception that the Peruvians, the people, the population has about their institutions that are very corrupt. So unless we start addressing that issue, how can we, write on the Energized Money Economic Index and say, yeah, everything is great, we're doing amazing, and yeah, it is true, we're doing amazingly or very good, I mean, in the economic sense, but we really need to address that. If that foundation is not strong, then at the end, we will never have that turning point that we're looking with these elections that may not come politically, but has to come with that. So that's basically what I think the reforms, the judiciary reforms, some of the reforms of the institution are key to continue. So I think that's my, my potato head trying to give a pass to the energized money. It has to be, if we don't address this. So if the next government, if it's Keiko or someone else, if it's far right, center, if they don't really address that, and they don't get the population, the Peruvians on board on that, then I'm afraid that then next elections we're going to be talking about the same issues. And
there will be a continuity of this conversation as well. You are exactly right. Last question, and then I'll go off script and ask a bonus question to each one of you. But this question goes to Nicolas and to Eric. Going back to Eric's term, the Energizer Bunny, what can other countries in Latin America learn from these different phenomena, these phenomena? Please, Nicolas, and then Eric.
Oh. Yeah, that's a good question, a hard question. What can they learn from Peru effectively, I guess? Well, I do think that, to reiterate, the importance of an independent central bank is really critical. To isolate, to foster, there was a lot of commentary that everyone was saying, to foster the human capital inside the institutions, to ensure that not only are they independent formally, but they can actually do the job. Right. I think Latin American countries should look at that as a really important way of securing that kind of macroeconomic stability that Peru's famous for, let's put it that way, right? And there are countries in Latin America that do that quite well, right? I mean, you have outliers, you have Uruguay, you have Chile, right? You have countries that have very strong states, very strong low levels of corruption, they're outliers. Peru is the real outlier because it has those, but has high levels of corruption and instability. So that's a kind of weird outlier that kind of needs to be explained, right? How did Peru manage to somehow combine what is typical in other countries in Latin America, which is high levels of political instability, with policy stability. It's a very unusual combination. So I do think that it's a case study. I don't know exactly what the causes are, and I think it's an interesting thing, and how much of those causes can be exported to other countries in the region that are facing similar problems, right? You do see institutional erosion in the region, right? Mexico, for example, independent institutions there are weakening over time, right? That's a very concerning thing. El Salvador is another example of a country that has seen severe erosion of institutions. So, you know, if you're seeking to ensure that these countries don't fall into a populist trap, right? Peru could give you a good example of how to avoid that. And like I said, you know, my political scientist hat is on, which is that like every case is different, right? But that doesn't mean that there aren't some commonalities that we can look at and see what can be exported. So Peru is an interesting case study that I think merits a lot more attention from DC actually, and the academic community here in the United States.
Yeah, I think this is exactly right. And I would say almost economically, the country has succeeded despite the political issues. And one issue that we haven't even talked about this morning is informality, which is clearly an issue in Peru, and it's a drag on development and a drag on economic growth and all these things that we know so well. We don't have time to explore it today, but that's another issue I would put in there. Look, when I was in graduate school in the 1980s, I know that was forever ago, we actually used Peru as an example of a failed state, right? So this was the first mandate of Alan Garcia. You know, you had the Shining Path. You had the economy was flat on its back. Peru had disavowed its international debt. It was shut out of international lending. It was a true basket case economically. And it was actually Alan Garcia, when he was president subsequent to that, who pushed through the U.S.-Peru free trade agreement that Mark, I think, quite appropriately referenced. And because he saw this as a way to create international guardrails around what Peru could or couldn't do, and actually use the negotiation process. Mark quite generously, and I would say accurately, but thank you, Mark, noted my own involvement in that process. The Peruvian government saw this as a way to help them create momentum domestically for the political reforms that they thought needed to be taken, but that they didn't have the political ability to force through, absent the external force of the United States saying, if you don't make these changes, you're not going to get an FTA. And I think that has proven to be a very effective approach in the context of U.S.-Peru relations, and the FTA, I would submit, has been a tremendous success over the last 20 years for both countries. And then I would also incorporate the idea that Peru is a member of APEC, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. So there's a direct and formal linkage to the Asia-Pacific community, and Peru is a member of the CPTPP, which is the subsequent or the successor to the TPP, which the United States pulled out of in 2016, or formally in 2017. But the point being is that Peru does have some of these international linkages which commit the country, no matter who the president and Congress are, to be to pursue a certain path, and it's that aspect of the rule of law that in many ways gives the confidence to the investor community to say, yes, there are issues of corruption. Nobody denies that. There are issues of informality. There are issues of education. All of that is true, no doubt about it. But the question is, how do you operate within an emerging market? Because we have to remember, Peru is not unique in that either. I mean, globally, you know, all emerging markets are stressed in some way. So it's a matter of how do you mitigate the risk? How do you build a theory of investment that works for the individual company in the sector? And I would also suggest that Peru has been blessed, obviously we've alluded to it, Peru has been blessed with a massive endowment of minerals and resources and important materials that the world needs. And the United States is focusing on Peru and other countries in the context of the critical minerals process. So again, you're institutionalizing these relations in a way that I think give comfort over the long term to people. It's not to say there won't be ups and downs, there won't be investment disputes, there won't be tax issues, all of that is absolutely true. But in the bigger picture, how do we figure out a way to continue to move forward in that context? And I think the issue for the Peruvian political class is how do you not kill that goose that's laying the golden egg? How do you build a political structure and do the political reforms that may be required to amplify and get the full benefit to use Nick's comments about how fast could Peru be growing in a different scenario, and I think that's real. It's hard to measure, and it's hard to win votes based on that, but nonetheless, I think that is a goal to aspire to. So again, cautiously optimistic. Going to have to be a president who's actually declared the winner, going to have to be inaugurated, going to have the public mandate to address some of these really tough issues, and going to have the team around him or her to be able to really build that momentum toward the direction that I think the Peruvian people ultimately want to go. But that, to me, spells success, and I'm looking forward to see how they operate and how they get to that point. So, but I think there are a lot of people in Washington wishing for Peruvian success right now.
Definitely. Well, thank you all for this amazing conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone watching live and watching afterwards will also learn. Before wrapping this up, I want to ask a last question to each one of you. I love prediction and predicting stuff. So I want to go first to Lima and ask Beatriz, who will join Keiko Fujimori for the runoff election? Only one option.
That's impossible to answer. Right now, at this very second, it is between, I would say, three. And it seems could be Mr. Rafael Lopez Aliaga, former mayor of Lima, but very, very close. So I don't want to make any. I just wanted to say a very brief thing about China.
Please go.
Only because they said that we are the poster child for the concerns of the influence of China in the region. This started 20 years ago, not with this port of Chancay. China is today, in Peru, the #1 investor in fishing, in mining, in energy, in agriculture. Having worked for so many years in Procter & Gamble, let me tell you, Procter & Gamble came to Peru. The first country in the region, they came in the 50s, in the 1950s, they came to Peru. So perhaps it is also that the American investors were not interested, and then the Chinese investors were interested, and they started investing. And that's the ambassador, the new ambassador that you have mentioned. I still don't know him, but I see with a lot of optimism his presence here. He is married to a Peruvian. He was married in Lima to a Peruvian. He has the most impeccable Spanish, and I will assume he's going to be a key player in the next 5 years with the new administration. And also, just for a gastronomic thing, 50% of the restaurants in Lima are Chinese food. So much so because we have a strong immigration in our past of Chinese people in our country. So there's a lot more, than a port between, and I think, and having been educated by the Americans, as I was, both in my school and my university and everything, and in Procter when I was in the corporate life, I am looking forward so that our new administration will foster and strengthen and build upon this great relationship that we both countries have in the defense of democracy and open economy as we should.
Thank you very much,
Good things for our country.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So Lopez Aliaga, you said it. Mark.
I said they're very
Mark, what is your pick?
Well, Diego, as Otto Reich likes to say, I have a crystal ball, but it's made in China, so it's not working. It's in the shop getting repaired. No, that's a joke. I know it's not only the Chinese that make things that need to get repaired, but no, I also take a pass, Diego. But I predict that Keiko Fujimori will be one of the two that'll pass.
Okay.
You think that
You're brave. You're brave.
Yeah.
Andres.
Well, maybe I'll break with that. I'll predict that the Mayor of Lima, Lopez Aliaga, who, if for no other reason that I've had the opportunity to engage with him a couple of times and been very impressed with not only what he's done in Lima, but also some of what he's offering for Peru. I think similarly about Keiko Fujimori, about the agendas that both would bring, and I think in that way, my view is an optimistic one for Peru and the U.S. relationship.
Thank you. Sonia.
I agree with Andres. I think it's going to be Keiko and Lopez Aliaga.
Nicolás.
I don't know. But obviously Keiko's going to make it. I do think that my eye is on Sanchez, what's happening in the interior. The vote comes in much slower from the interior of Peru. It's very close between the three of them. And what I would say is it's not neutral who ends up second. It can matter a lot what is going to happen in terms of who comes in second. And the last thing I'll say is pay a very close eye, not only as the presidential election, but what the constitution of the Congress will be. Because that arguably is even more important than the president. So that's what I would say.
Eric.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, you have to also, how do you put this? The complications over the elections on Sunday provides a path so that the person or persons who do not, who fall outside the top two have the pathway to claim fraud. And I think that is a very important aspect to watch because that will complicate things. It will go to the question of legitimacy of the top two, and that will be a real mess. So I think that's something to watch. Number one. Number two is, I think Beatriz is exactly right, just completely changing the direction, but on the China issue. China was there. China saw opportunity. China moved in. The United States was caught flat-footed, and I completely agree with that. And I think I've been a strong advocate, as have many others in this room, that the United States, we need to up our game in the region, and in particular with countries like Peru. We need to be there, and we need to be there actively and optimistically and engage in a true partnership with Peru and the Peruvian people because it's in our interest to do so. It's not charity. It's in our interest to do so. And it's not a matter of backing out the Chinese necessarily. It's a matter of we need to show that we are the better partner. And so I think there's a lot of work that can be done, should be done, needs to be done. But hopefully through conversations like this, we're helping that along. So again, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. And nobody's asking, but I agree with Sonia, Andres, and with Beatriz, with Lopez Aliaga. I want to thank you all for joining today's panel. I want to thank my team, Victoria, Joseba. Also thank again our host, Florida International University, and those who joined virtually. Thank you for joining this edition of the Americas Desk. This Friday, we have an Americas Desk from Caracas, Venezuela. So stay tuned